In March 2025, customers entering several well-known tea shops in Kyoto encountered an unusual restriction. They could buy only one matcha product each. The problem was not a failed factory or a shipping delay. Demand had simply risen beyond what producers could make. Certain powders disappeared from shelves, orders accumulated. Tea companies that had spent generations persuading people to appreciate matcha were suddenly asking them to purchase less of it. This should have been an easy problem to solve. When the world wants more coffee, soda, or bottled water, companies expand production. Matcha is different. Its raw material grows only as fast as a tea bush can produce tender leaves. The bushes must be managed long before harvest, shaded at precisely the right stage, picked, steamed, dried, sorted, stored, blended, and ground. New fields require years, not weeks. Skilled workers cannot be downloaded, duplicated, or switched on for the summer. The result is a strange collision between two kinds of time. On one side is the speed of online fashion, where a green drink can become globally desirable almost overnight. On the other is an agricultural tradition shaped by seasons, regional knowledge, and rituals that reward patience. That collision raises a larger mystery. How did a bowl of bitter green foam, once used by Buddhist monks and military elites, become a sweet café drink ordered through a phone? Why did Japan preserve powdered tea when China, where the method developed, largely moved toward other ways of drinking tea? And how did a practice built around restraint become a worldwide market struggling with excess demand? To understand why matcha cannot simply be manufactured faster, we have to begin with the fact that matcha does not grow anywhere. Tea grows. Matcha is invented. Every traditional tea begins with the same general species, Camellia sinensis. The final drink depends on what humans do to the leaves, when they pick them, how they heat them, whether they roll them, how much they allow them to oxidize, and whether they leave them whole or reduce them to powder. Long before anyone used the Japanese word matcha, communities in China had spent centuries transforming tea from a local plant into a cultivated product. Early tea could be cooked with other ingredients or formed into compressed cakes for storage and transportation. Processing made the leaves more stable, easier to trade, and increasingly useful to governments that could tax, distribute, or demand tea as tribute. By the Tang dynasty, tea had become the subject of specialized knowledge. Writers described water, equipment, preparation, and regional quality. Tea was no longer merely something consumed, it was something judged. During the Song dynasty, beginning in the 10th century, elite tea culture developed a preparation method that would look surprisingly familiar to a modern matcha drinker. Processed tea was ground into powder. Hot water was added. The mixture was beaten until foam formed across the surface. The powder was not identical to today's Japanese matcha. Cultivation, processing, grinding equipment, varieties and standards changed over the centuries. Yet the essential act was already present. Instead of steeping leaves and removing them, the drinker consumed finely ground tea suspended in water. Song tea culture turned this method into a performance. The finest tribute teas were produced with enormous care. Leaves could be steamed, pressed into decorated cakes, dried, stored, ground, and prepared for wealthy consumers or the imperial court. Regional names acquired reputations. A particular mountain or district could become a mark of refinement, much as famous wine regions later converted geography into value. Tea competitions added another layer. Participants judged the color, aroma, foam, texture, and persistence of the mixture. White foam stood out dramatically against dark glazed bowls, especially the black and brown ceramics made in Chinese kilns. The bowl was not a neutral container. Its color helped display the skill of the person preparing the tea. A network formed around the drink. Farmers, kiln workers, merchants, monks, officials, writers, servants, and connoisseurs. The product's apparent simplicity depended on their combined labor. Buddhist institutions played an important role in this world. Tea helped monks remain alert during long periods of study and meditation. It also fit into systems of hospitality and ceremonial exchange. Monasteries connected people, texts, objects, and practices across regions. Those networks eventually carried powdered tea across the sea. Tea had reached Japan before the 12th century, but its cultivation and consumption remained limited and did not spread evenly. It could appear at court or within Buddhist circles and then lose prominence. The decisive revival is traditionally associated with a monk named Aisai. Aisai traveled to China, studied forms of Buddhism that contributed to the development of Japanese Zen, and returned to Japan in 1191. He is said to have brought tea seeds with him. More important than any single handful of seeds, however, was the package of ideas surrounding them. Tea was useful. Tea could support religious discipline. Tea could be cultivated. Tea could be connected to health, order, and the welfare of society. In the early 13th century, Aisai wrote a treatise commonly known as Drinking Tea for Health. Like many pre-modern medical works, it combined observation with theories that do not match modern medicine. Its importance lies not in treating every claim as scientifically correct, but in showing how tea was being promoted. It was presented as more than a pleasant drink. One widely reported episode places Aisai in Kamakura, where the shogun Minamoto no Sanetomo had become ill after drinking heavily. Aisai reportedly offered tea and a copy of his treatise. The exact details have been repeated and embellished over time, but the broader connection is clear. Tea entered the world of Japan's new military rulers carrying an aura of monastic knowledge and medicinal value. It was a useful identity. The drink stimulated without intoxicating. It arrived with the prestige of Chinese learning. Its preparation required equipment and knowledge that distinguished insiders from outsiders. Traditional accounts say that the monk Mayoi planted tea associated with Eisai at Kozanji, northwest of Kyoto, and that plants were later established in Uji. The individual steps are not documented with the precision of a modern agricultural record, but the broader development is secure. Tea cultivation expanded around Kyoto, and Uji eventually became one of Japan's most prestigious production areas. Geography helped. Southern Kyoto had rainfall, sloping terrain, mist, and significant differences between daytime and nighttime temperatures. The region was also close enough to Kyoto to serve temples, aristocrats, warriors, merchants, and political institutions. Proximity to power mattered as much as soil. By the 15th century, Uji tea had received the support of the Ashikaga shoguns. Gardens were established and protected. Names of production areas became markers of quality. Consumers did not simply ask for tea, they wanted tea from the right place. Among elites, gatherings known as tea contests tested whether participants could distinguish one tea from another. Guests sampled bowls and attempted to identify origins or rank quality. Prizes could be extravagant. Drinking tea became a demonstration of memory, taste, wealth, and familiarity with elite goods. The objects surrounding tea grew equally important. Imported Chinese ceramics, lacquerware, paintings, and metalwork could be displayed as treasures. A small container or bowl might possess a recorded history, a poetic name, or an association with a previous owner. Tea offered an occasion to show these objects and, through them, to display access to international trade. The contradiction was already visible. Tea could support Buddhist discipline, but it could also fuel conspicuous consumption. It could represent clarity, yet gatherings might become elaborate spectacles. It was praised for simplicity while being surrounded by expensive imports and competitive status. That tension helped produce the next transformation. Over generations, influential tea practitioners began to favor a more restrained atmosphere. Instead of treating Chinese luxury as the only ideal, they experimented with humbler rooms, local ceramics, bamboo utensils, weathered surfaces, and irregular forms. This was not a sudden rejection of wealth. A simple-looking tea room could require great expertise and carefully selected objects. Knowing when an imperfection was beautiful rather than merely defective demanded education. Restraint itself became a form of distinction. The approach reached extraordinary influence in the 16th century through Sen no Rikyu. Rikyu was not the inventor of every practice associated with the tea ceremony, but he became its most famous reformer. He served two of Japan's most powerful military leaders, Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, during an era of civil war and political consolidation. This placed tea inside the machinery of power. A gathering could provide a controlled environment where rulers met allies, rewarded followers, displayed prized objects, and demonstrated authority. Tea utensils could be granted like treasures. Access to a celebrated tea master carried political meaning. A small room could become a stage on which rank was both displayed and temporarily rearranged. Guests might enter through a low opening that forced them to bow. Weapons were left outside. Movements followed established patterns. Attention narrowed to water, fire, utensils, sound, and the shared bowl. The ideal suggested equality and humility, but it existed within a deeply unequal society. The warlord and the subordinate did not cease to know their positions. Instead, tea created a temporary space where power was expressed through control rather than noise. Rikyu's association with rustic simplicity also affected Japanese craft. Potters created bowls specifically suited to whisked tea. Bamboo became an admired material for scoops and flower containers. Korean and Japanese vessels could be valued alongside, or even above, conventionally perfect Chinese imports. Matcha was no longer merely a preparation method inherited from China. It had become the center of an expanding Japanese aesthetic system. Yet the appearance of simplicity concealed a demanding agricultural breakthrough. Modern matcha begins before the leaves are picked. Tea bushes intended for high-quality tencha, the processed leaf material later ground into matcha, are covered before harvest. Traditional growers used structures of reeds and straw. Modern farms may use manufactured cloth, but the principle remains the same: reduce the sunlight reaching the new growth. A plant responds to this artificial darkness. Tea leaves normally use sunlight to drive photosynthesis and to shape the production of many chemical compounds. Under shade, the plant adjusts. Chlorophyll levels rise as the leaves attempt to capture limited light, deepening the green color. The balance of amino acids, caffeine, and catechins changes. More of the amino acids associated with sweetness and umami can remain in the leaf, while some bitter and astringent characteristics are reduced. Shade does not automatically create excellent matcha. Timing, cultivar, weather, soil, nutrition, harvest quality, and processing still matter. Too much moisture can encourage disease. Covers can be damaged by wind. Tender growth is vulnerable. The method also adds labor and expense before a single leaf reaches the factory. Once harvested, the leaves must be heated quickly to stop enzymatic oxidation. In Japanese green tea production, this is usually done with steam. Leaves intended for sencha are rolled as they dry. Tencha is different. Its leaves are steamed and dried without the intensive rolling that gives sencha its familiar needle-like form. Stems and tougher veins are later removed, leaving thin, fragile flakes. Only then does tencha become ready for grinding. Traditional stone mills crush the leaf slowly into extremely fine particles. Excessive speed creates heat, and heat can damage aroma and color. Fine powder also behaves differently from coarse powder. It suspends more evenly, feels smoother in the mouth, and forms the texture expected in a properly prepared bowl. This is why ordinary green tea cannot become authentic matcha merely by passing through a kitchen blender. The leaf has been cultivated and processed for a different purpose. The production system transformed uji. Farmers built shading structures. Specialists processed leaves. Merchants graded, blended, aged, stored, and transported tea. Craftspeople produced whisks, bowls, scoops, caddies, kettles, and containers. Tea schools trained practitioners who maintained demand. The final bowl might be consumed in minutes, but it represented a year of agricultural decisions and centuries of accumulated technique. During the Tokugawa period, beginning in the early 17th century, the political value of uji tea became remarkably visible. The shogunate organized official journeys to collect tea for the ruling family. Decorated storage jars were carried from Uji toward Edo, the city now called Tokyo. The procession moved with the formality normally associated with high officials. People along the route encountered not merely a shipment, but a performance of government authority. Roads could be cleared. Communities prepared for the party's arrival. The tea inside the jars gained prestige from the attention surrounding it. This annual movement also revealed how carefully quality was managed before refrigeration. Tea harvested in spring could be sealed in jars and stored through the hot months, sometimes in cool mountain environments, before being opened later in the year. Storage was part of production, not an afterthought. The shogunate's interest protected uji matcha and tied it to Japan's ruling class, but protection created dependence. A product favored by powerful patrons becomes vulnerable when those patrons lose money, change taste, or disappear. At the same time, Japanese tea culture was developing an alternative. By the 17th century, steeped leaf tea had become increasingly influential in China. Powdered tea and the black bowls associated with it had already fallen out of mainstream fashion there. Chinese monks and merchants helped introduce newer steeping practices to Japan, where they appealed to different consumers. Instead of grinding leaves and whisking the powder, a drinker could place processed leaves in a pot, add water, and pour the infusion into smaller cups. This method became associated with sencha. Sencha culture offered its own forms of refinement, but it was generally less dependent on the elaborate procedures of chanoyu. It attracted scholars, artists, merchants, and townspeople who could define themselves against the formal world of warrior tea. In 1738, a Uji area producer named Nagatani Soen developed a highly influential method of steaming, hand-rolling, and drying green tea leaves. The Uji method improved color, aroma, and flavor, and helped create the foundation for modern Japanese sencha production. The innovation strengthened Japanese green tea as a whole. It also gave consumers another reason not to drink matcha every day. Sencha was easier to prepare. Its leaves could be steeped more than once. A family did not need to grind tea or follow the procedures of a formal gathering. As production and distribution improved, leaf tea entered ordinary domestic life far more extensively than matcha. By the late Tokugawa period, Uji's premium matcha trade faced serious pressure. The finances of the shogunate and many feudal domains weakened. Elite purchases declined. Fires and other disruptions damaged parts of the local industry. Some producers shifted toward gyokuro, another prestigious shaded tea, but one prepared as whole leaves rather than powder. Then, in 1868, the Tokugawa political system collapsed. Matcha lost its most powerful institutional customers almost at once. The new Meiji government attempted to modernize Japan and renegotiate its place in the world. Tea became an important export, especially to the United States, but the tea shipped abroad was largely leaf tea rather than traditional matcha. Foreign customers already understood tea as an infusion. They wanted something that could be packed, transported, steeped, and sold within familiar commercial systems. Powdered tea associated with a highly specialized Japanese ritual did not fit as easily. Matcha might have become a historical curiosity. It survived because the tea ceremony had developed institutions that outlived the governments that once sponsored it. Tea families and schools preserved procedures, utensils, knowledge, and social networks. Students continued to learn how to prepare thin tea and thick tea, how to handle a bowl, how to fold a cloth, and how to respond as a guest. Matcha remained necessary because the practice required it. The ceremony also found new social roles. In modern Japan, tea training became part of cultural education, and at times, preparation in etiquette expected especially of women. This history should not be romanticized as timeless harmony. Participation reflected changing ideas about class, gender, nationalism, and respectable behavior. Still, institutional repetition protected the product. Every lesson consumed matcha. Every gathering taught another person what the powder was supposed to taste like. Every inherited utensil carried the history of earlier gatherings into a new generation. Food manufacturers provided another route to survival. Matcha had long appeared in sweets, but modern processing expanded the possibilities. Powder could color and flavor cakes, candies, noodles, ice cream, and packaged desserts. Lower-cost material, unsuitable for a formal bowl, could still be commercially useful when combined with sugar, flour, fat, or milk. Machines changed production as well. Specialized dryers handled tencha more consistently. Mechanical harvesters reduced some labor requirements. Powered mills increased grinding capacity, although premium matcha continued to reward slow and careful milling. Refrigerated storage and improved packaging helped protect the powder from light, oxygen, heat, and moisture. Matcha is chemically and physically fragile. Its bright color fades. Aromatic compounds dissipate. Fine particles absorb odors and react quickly with the surrounding environment. A sealed tin is therefore not merely decorative. Packaging is part of the attempt to preserve something that begins deteriorating as soon as it is ground. By the late 20th century, matcha occupied several worlds at once. Within chanoyu, it remained the focus of a disciplined practice. Within Japanese food manufacturing, it became an ingredient. Within tourism, it became an experience associated with Kyoto and Japanese tradition. Outside Japan, however, it was still unfamiliar to many consumers. That began to change as Japanese food and popular culture traveled more widely. Restaurants introduced green tea ice cream and matcha desserts. Specialty tea companies explained the powder to Western customers. Tourism exposed millions of visitors to Kyoto sweets, tea shops, and ceremonial demonstrations. The internet allowed farmers, retailers, and enthusiasts to demonstrate whisking techniques without opening a physical store abroad. Then cafés discovered milk. A matcha latte solved several commercial problems at once. Milk softened bitterness. Sugar made unfamiliar flavors easier to accept. The drink could be prepared with equipment already found behind cafe counters. Its green color photographed well, creating an immediate visual identity in a market crowded with brown coffee beverages. Matcha also entered the wellness economy. It contains caffeine, catechins, the amino acid theanine, chlorophyll, and other components naturally found in tea leaves. Because the leaf itself is consumed rather than removed after steeping, the drinker ingests material that would remain behind in an ordinary infusion. Those facts encouraged a flood of exaggerated claims. Matcha was marketed as a detoxifier, fat burner, cancer preventative, meditation aid, and nearly miraculous replacement for coffee. The evidence is far less dramatic. Caffeine can improve alertness. Research suggests that caffeine and theanine together may produce modest short-term effects on some measures of attention and cognition, although results vary. Matcha contains compounds of scientific interest, but it is still a caffeinated food, not a universal treatment. The language of quality became equally confusing. International sellers often divide matcha into ceremonial grade and culinary grade. These terms can help communicate intended use, but they do not represent a single universal Japanese legal grading system. A bright label cannot guarantee origin, harvest quality, shading method, cultivar, or taste. The word matcha itself became commercially valuable. Powders made from different leaves, processed by different methods, or produced outside Japan could be marketed using the prestige accumulated by Japanese matcha. Some were excellent products in their own right. Others depended more on color and advertising than on traditional tencha production. This was the final transformation. Matcha became an idea larger than its original supply chain. By the early 2020s, that idea was everywhere. Matcha appeared in lattes, smoothies, cookies, protein products, skincare, cocktails, breakfast bowls, and brightly colored social media videos. New customers did not need to understand shanoyu. They only needed to recognize the green. For Japanese tea producers, the boom created opportunity. Domestic demand for traditional leaf tea had been declining for years, while international demand for powdered tea was rising. Farmers converted fields toward tencha. Regions beyond Kyoto expanded production. Companies invested in dryers, mills, blending facilities, export certification, and organic cultivation. Japanese green tea exports reached repeated records. Much of the growth was connected to powdered tea, especially products destined for cafes and food manufacturing. But agricultural supply does not react like a video trend. A producer deciding today to plant new bushes may wait several years for a useful harvest. Converting an existing field changes farm management and requires suitable processing equipment. Tencha factories operate during a narrow harvest period. Stone mills have physical limits. Experienced blenders and growers carry knowledge that takes time to develop. The labor force adds another constraint. Many Japanese farming communities are aging. Fewer young people are entering agriculture. Mechanization can help with harvesting and transport, but machines do not eliminate the need for judgment. A farmer must still decide when to cover a field, when to pick, how to respond to weather, and which leaves justify higher processing costs. Climate pressure makes those decisions harder. Tea is a perennial crop. The same bush remains exposed to repeated summers, winters, droughts, storms, pests, and diseases. Extreme heat can damage plants months before the next harvest. Warm winters can alter dormancy. An early burst of growth may be followed by frost. Heavy rain can interfere with fieldwork or encourage disease beneath covers. The 2025 shortage demonstrated how these pressures combine. Global demand had already risen. Tourism increased purchases inside Japan. Producers were operating close to capacity. Then heat stress reduced yields in important areas of Kyoto. Tencha prices rose sharply, and established companies restricted sales. The shortage was not proof that the world was about to run out of green powder forever. It was evidence that premium matcha depends on a narrow set of conditions that cannot be expanded without consequences. Growers can chase volume by increasing mechanization, harvesting more mature leaves, shortening shade periods, or sourcing from wider regions. Manufacturers can use faster grinding systems. Cafés can switch suppliers or blends. Each solution changes the product. This does not necessarily mean the change is bad. Matcha has never been frozen in time. Song-powdered tea was not identical to medieval Japanese tea. Medieval matcha was not as finely ground as many modern powders. 16th-century shading materials differed from industrial cloth. Tea ceremony itself changed across centuries. Tradition survives partly by adapting. The harder question is, which qualities must remain for the word matcha to stay meaningful? Is it enough for a product to be green tea powder? Must it be made from unrolled tencha? Does origin matter? Does stone milling matter? Can a powder designed for a sweetened factory beverage be judged by the same standards as tea intended for a bowl of water? Who has the authority to decide? The answers will shape the next stage of the industry. Researchers are developing cultivars suited to heat, disease, mechanized harvest, and changing climates. Farmers are experimenting with shading materials and production schedules. Regional governments are supporting tencha processing and export systems. Producers are deciding whether to protect scarce premium lines, expand ingredient-grade output, or attempt both. Consumers also influence the outcome. A customer who buys the cheapest green powder available encourages one kind of production. A cafe that asks about origin, harvest, processing, and freshness encourages another. A person who first encounters matcha in a sweet latte may eventually become curious about drinking it with water. Commercial adaptation can flatten a tradition, but it can also create the first doorway into it. That possibility would be familiar to the generations that transformed tea before us. Chinese producers converted leaves into stable cakes and powders. Monks connected tea with attention and discipline. Japanese growers adapted imported plants to new landscapes. Warriors converted a beverage into political theater. Tea masters turned humble materials into objects of contemplation. Uji farmers manipulated sunlight itself to alter flavor. Modern factories carried the powder into sweets. Cafés mixed it with milk and introduced it to millions. No single group created matcha once and for all. Its history is a chain of people inheriting a practice, misunderstanding part of it, preserving another part, and changing the rest. Return, then, to the Kyoto shop in 2025. A customer sees a limit of one matcha item and may interpret it as a temporary inconvenience. Behind that notice lies a much larger system. Bushes recovering from extreme heat, farmers working beneath artificial shade, factories active for only a brief harvest, mills turning slowly, blenders protecting limited stocks, and centuries-old companies facing demand from customers their predecessors could never have imagined. The shortage is not separate from matcha's history. It is the newest expression of its oldest characteristic. Matcha has always created value by resisting speed. Its leaves are shaded rather than rushed toward maximum growth. Its finest powders are milled carefully rather than violently. Its traditional preparation asks the drinker to notice movements that ordinary life ignores. Even its foam is temporary, forming for a moment and then disappearing. The global market took this product of deliberate attention and transformed it into a symbol of modern efficiency. Energy without coffee, health in a cup, tradition available for takeaway. That transformation is not entirely false. Matcha has repeatedly been both practical and symbolic, both stimulant and ritual, both commodity and art. Its contradictions are the reason it survived. But its future may depend on whether the world learns to recognize the difference between consuming its color and understanding its value. 8 centuries ago, powdered tea crossed the sea because monks, merchants, and travelers carried more than leaves. They carried a method. Japan preserved that method after it faded from the mainstream elsewhere, then surrounded it with farming knowledge, political meaning, craftsmanship, and ritual. Today, matcha is crossing another boundary, from specialized tradition to global habit. The green powder in a modern cup is therefore neither ancient nor new. It is a surviving Chinese technique, a Japanese agricultural achievement, a product of religious discipline, an artifact of warrior politics, an industrial ingredient, and an internet-age commodity. And the faster the world drinks it, the more clearly matcha reminds us that some things cannot be made meaningful or plentiful overnight. If this story changed how you see matcha, like the video and subscribe. Would you protect traditional matcha for tea bowls, or expand production so everyone can keep ordering lattes?